Let me get unmuted. We are ready. We're ready.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Spokane County Planning Commission. Today is Thursday, May the 28th, 4:30 p.m. A couple of housekeeping items. The public may participate in person or remotely by utilizing our web link and telephone conference links. Star 9 to raise your hand, star 6 to speak. Individuals are limited to 1 3-minute comment period for any item. Please keep your comments specific to the current agenda item. Chat is not supported. Today, I think we have a quorum. Logan, are you on?
Man, can you hear me all right?
We can. Thank you so much for joining us remotely. So
Absolutely.
why don't you announce your name and we'll do the introductions.
Sounds good. Logan Camporiali.
Clyde Hossing, Pete Rayner.
I'm Stephen Pohl, your chairman. Thanks everyone for being here. It's gratifying to see people in the audience and listening to what we have to talk about. Today, the first thing we normally do is allow members of the public to comment on any item that is not NOT on this current agenda. So that would be the time to take the mic. And if you want to talk about something that is not what we're going to talk about today, now would be the time to do that. That could be someone online or someone in the audience. Any takers? Come on down. Not on this agenda.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, come on. Yeah. You're the guy I want to talk to. Just maybe your name.
All right, yes. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Justin Blaine. Last name
You
B.
got a card here.
I do have a card there, sir.
Oh, okay, then. Okay, go ahead.
First time here though, so if I'm
Don't be nervous.
messing up the routine, I'm not nervous.
We're all friends.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity to share and for the work going into this process, Mr. Chesney. My name is Justin Blaine. I'm here to respectfully request that Spokane County parcel number 240329023 on Abbott Road, just south of I-90 off the Geiger exit, be evaluated for possible inclusion in the urban growth area as part of the 2026 comprehensive plan update. We were not able to submit a letter during the county's earlier letter of interest process because we did not purchase the property until after the deadline for that letter to be submitted. Or else we would have. Our parcel is directly adjacent to neighboring properties who did submit letters and are potentially being evaluated. We believe that evaluating our parcel alongside those properties would support a more logical and contiguous growth pattern rather than leaving an isolated gap next to both the existing UGA boundary and other parcels already under review. This parcel is also situated in an area with existing infrastructure. There's a city water main along Abbott Road, which extends down and serves Westwood Middle School and the Cheney School District. More broadly, we believe evaluating this parcel is consistent with Spokane County's goals related to orderly growth, housing opportunities, and long-term affordability. Where location and infrastructure already support it, thoughtful UGA expansion can help create additional housing opportunities and stronger communities. Again, my request tonight is straightforward. We respectfully ask that our parcel be evaluated for possible inclusion alongside the neighboring properties already being considered as part of the 2026 comprehensive plan update. Again, thank you for your work, time, and consideration and allowing me to speak tonight.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thanks.
So noted, Mr. Chesney. First item of business, I'll turn it over to Scott.
No.
Critical area ordinance. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for everybody attending. We've got two items for you today. The first is an update on the critical areas ordinance. You have seen this a few times in the past. We staff and our consulting team have been reacting to comments that we have received from the public as well as deliberations from this group. We wanted to bring you an update. And also reflect that there's still continuing effort on this. We've scheduled this for a public hearing before you in July 16th. And so there's another 30 to 45 days of comment gathering between that. We intend to post a final draft for review 3 weeks ahead of that meeting, so the end of June. So in one sense, there's about 30 days of work time to update this. And then there'll be a final draft document, which again, we'll be taking suggestions and comments on up to and including your public hearing in July. If you choose to make a recommendation to the board at that time, that's great. We will put it on the shelf, so to speak, and we will bring it forward with the comp plan approval cycle in November and December. So, quick reminder for those that may be seeing some of this for the first time, these are the very basic parameters of what we use in our critical area. Wetlands, CARs or critical aquifer recharge areas, flooded areas, hazardous, and fish and wildlife areas. Since at the April 30th meeting, there were a number of comments made to best available science, adding standards, focusing on critical areas, aquifer protection that you have seen, and some of that is in the revised documents. Reviewing the update structure through the amendments, get public comments. All of these have been addressed by our consulting team. We sent to you in this meeting's packet a matrix of comments received from the public, from agencies and others to share with you on how our team has responded to their comments. And so you see some of those again here that we're still working on. And in the comment sheet that you have, there's a handful of those that suggest that further discussion is needed with the county on county policy. Those will be some meetings that we'll be convening as quickly as we can. And as we talked about briefly before, we're going to treat that much like we did our technical advisory committees for other chapters in the comprehensive plan. Recognizing the CAO is not the comprehensive plan, they're separate but linked documents. But as we noodle over policy implications, we're going to bring in others, interested parties, technical experts to help us guide what that policy outline might look like before we bring it to you for a recommendation. So a couple other things, just kind of go through these quickly. Comments from DFW, clarifying standards, expanded mitigation plan requirements. Ecology comments, again, definitions updated, keeping the best available science in here for policies, and some things for future discussion, buffers, tables, and subdivision related standards. And the subdivision ordinance, not to get too far off track, subdivisions have been a topic at the legislature for the last 3 sessions, notably with the request to streamline short plats to provide a better opportunity to move those through the system faster to get that land available for development. And that, in one sense, that's fine. We like to be able to get an applicant through a system, through a permitting path as soon as possible. But we want to make sure that if we're doing that, we're aligning it with best available science, and we're not going so fast as to forget or neglect some of the environmental responsibilities of land actions, because as you can guess, once a plat is recorded, that's as close to something chiseled in stone as happens in our business. So we want to make sure we're linked on those examples back here. Some comments from Ms. McHugh. Those are in your packet, but a lot of suggested changes for clarity and terminology. We've looked at a great deal of these. Some have been able to be answered. Some are still in progress. Comments from Ms. Horn. And our consulting team has a more direct response to a recent letter from her that we'll be sending out today or tomorrow. But looking at, again, mapping, and mapping is a key issue. We talked about it last time. It's one thing to have words and policies on paper that you can look at and guide and interpret. It's so important to have maps to look at and say, okay, this is where I'm talking about. These are the hazards here. I can turn on or turn off the layers on the various hazards, and I can get a sense of what challenges we've got for development. One of the things that we have changed most recently is what are called the stormwater impact areas or frequently flooded areas. Those have been mapped historically by the county and kept in our mapping file, notably in our public works and engineering file, we have gone back and resurrected those and included that in the planning mapping file so that when somebody now turns on a critical area to advise an applicant or somebody in the land coming in to do something, we'll be able to see areas like the West Terraces that are earmarked as flood prone. And I think, that's an overdue step because we've had some of that data for a while, but we haven't always used it as practically as we could. So we're going back and saying, again, best available science. If we know these data, planners and the people that are issuing permits need to have access to them so that we can evaluate whether something should be built or whether it's an area that should be avoided for development. With that, I would take any questions that you may have or from the public on this and kind of teeing up the second part of this side of it. Dr. Chad Pritchard from Eastern Washington University is here and has done some extensive work on groundwater geology, hydrogeology, pollution on the West Plains. And that's been an issue that we have all learned a great deal about in the last year and a half to 2 years, and he's here to share some results with you as well. But if there are any questions about what we've seen or comments from these last couple of meetings, happy to open that to the public or to you commissioners.
Yes, I thought Mr. Pritchard was coming first.
Okay.
I guess for clarity, I would suggest we let Dr. Pritchard make his presentation. That may answer some questions that people have. And if not, we can take those questions after he is finished. Dr. Pritchard, please go ahead.
I love hearing the flood layers coming out. Scott is amazing. County director, public work, what is it, planning?
Planning.
Yeah, man, he is a wonderful person. You guys are lucky to have.
Oh, don't.
Scott Chesney. Oh, okay. So yeah, I'm Chad. I teach geology. What's that? I teach geology at Eastern Washington University in the Department of Geosciences. In the last 2 years, we've worked on this West Plains PFAS fate and transport study that we have right here. And so what we did, we had about $450,000 over the last 2 years from Department of Ecology. And we picked about 30 locations to go out and sample that was in surface water and groundwater around the West Plains and monitor throughout a year. We took a lot of parameters like temperature, DO, and all that kind of stuff, and then mostly sampled it for PFAS. Then we also went out and each summer sampled about 120 private wells going throughout the whole West Plains and got PFAS data, gave those data to the homeowners for free. Luckily enough, we were able to work with Department of Ecology and Department of Health to get people filters, inter-ring filtration for their house, under sink filters, if their results came back above the drinking water standard. We installed a bunch of data loggers because there wasn't really a lot of information. Spokane County Water Resources had about 13 wells across the entire like Davenport to Spokane area for well depths, and that was for 1 year, which kind of blew my mind. So now we have data loggers all over the place. And then we also did some radiocarbon dates and kind of looked at foam and rain and all sorts of kind of stuff for this report. So I'm going to try and go through pretty quick. Yeah, tell me if I'm going too fast. There's a picture of this horn right there with West Terrace. There's obviously some issues with groundwater and stormwater in our area. This is actually kind of one of the first things I came into was the West Terrace area with so much flooding. And it makes me happy that Scott Chesney is on top of this. And that you guys have now some sort of a system that helps get water out of there. But there's also, of course, Fairchild Air Force Base tested positive for releasing PFAS, a firefighting foam agent in shallow groundwater. And then also the airport, Spokane International Airport has also been found to release it. Completely unrelated to those, we have Cheney Water Well 5, and I was just at Cheney City Council on Tuesday presenting some work on that the students at Eastern have done for Cheney as well, and kind of located a little plume that kind of comes from that area. The next steps there are to sample for soil and figure out where it exactly is located. But then we also were able to find a couple other places that potentially had some contamination to them in the Airwood Heights area, and Department of Ecology is starting to work with the property owners for that as well. Why would we care about PFAS? We care about PFAS because it's regulated by the federal government and the state at a level of 4 parts per trillion, which is ridiculously small amounts. Imagine like having like 4 cents and of $1 billion. I mean, that 4 cents is a pretty small amount of that. That's these 4 parts per trillion. So PFAS and PFOA, PFAS is one of the major parts of AFFF, the firefighting foam that people practice with it. I love firefighters because I'm from Medical Lake. And 2 years ago, we would be taken out if there wasn't fire district 3. But the PFAS, they practice with it regularly, fill up whole hangars with it. And then the same thing at Spokane International Airport and Seattle, across the world, people tested with this stuff. The structure of it looks a lot like a radio or like a carbon, carbon and hydrogen, but this is made in the laboratory to make Teflon for gaskets. And so it was made to be waterproof and to last forever, essentially. And so they took the carbon out and they took the hydrogen out and put fluorine in there. So it makes a super duper strong waterproof bottom. So it's great material for industrial manufacturing, keep waterproofing, fire suppressants in our area. The AFFF is huge. And then things like Teflon have been used for decades with PFAS. And then unfortunately, we do find that causes immune response issues, potential cancers, thyroid functions. High cholesterol is really, really linked to it with liver issues. And that's why, if you remember in 2017, I'm sure everybody remembers in 2017, the standard was 70 parts per trillion. And then the state went to 10, and then the federal government went to 4. Because the more we learn about it, the more it's starting to mess up systems in people's body. So the way we get exposed to it, essentially right now, is most like drinking water. If the water is contaminated, we drink water hopefully all the time. I'm always telling my kids drink more water. So we're constantly all doing that. And then it gets into your blood system through that way. Generally speaking, it is hydrophobic though. And so it usually is found in soils. And so they're starting to find Department of Health found that it's in chickens that peck in the soils, and it's in cattle, and it's throughout the entire system. So where would we do our study in the West Plains? You can't, oh, yeah, it doesn't work on the screen, does it? The red line right there is our border. So we go from the very tippy top north on the Spokane River down to Hangman, and then up Marshall Creek, across beautiful Medical Lake and those ridges and hills there, and then up Deep Creek back to the Spokane River is kind of our boundary for what we call the West Plains. And this map shows you a bunch of the wells that we tested. The green ones by Fairchild came from them, and then some Spokane International Airport gave us some of ours. Throughout this talk, this short, I'm trying to go quick. We did a groundwater model, and that's what you can see right here. So generally speaking, groundwater kind of flows to the northeast throughout the West Plains. And that's actually one of the reasons I started doing this project, is because we were doing a critical areas ordinance for Medical Lake. We were like, I don't know how the lake interacts with groundwater at all. And so we put data loggers in the lake and made little wells and piezometers and stuff. And so we're trying to figure that out, associated with PFAS as well. That is that general groundwater flow to the northeast, most of it. So geology is what controls it all. And that's why I love what I do, is because the geology to me is fascinating. So here's our little 3D model. I can take off the fluff on top and go to these older rocks, 1.5 billion year old rocks, 49 million year old rocks, metamorphic cores and stuff like that. And this is important for us because it's like the bottom of the bathtub for the groundwater in that area. Water can't get through it very easily. It takes about 10 years for groundwater to flow 1 foot through those bedrock aquifers and through the rock itself. So you can see a little map off to this side. And our students in Eastern have gone through and grabbed samples at all our buttes that we have in our area, and done radiocarbon, or not radiocarbon, that'd be only 40,000 years old. We did uranium lead dating of all the different buttes to figure out how they are, and trying to map out where they are in the subsurface. So you can kind of see that there's generally still a trend off to the northeast. On top of that, about 16 million years ago, these big eruptions came from eastern Washington and eastern Oregon and brought us our beautiful basalt. We have an older layer, 16.5 million years old, and then a little hiatus where there's clay layers right there, that yellow stuff called the Latop Formation. Sometimes you can find little twigs and like fossils and stuff in there, but that holds the water pretty well. And then Wanapum basalt is on the very top, so the upper basalt. And if you think about this rock, I mean, water doesn't flow through rock pretty easy, right? I mean, it takes about a foot to go, or for about a year for the water to go about a foot in these basalts. So it's going pretty slow. But this is our dominant aquifer for private well owners as well as municipalities in this area. And Congress, the whole area. And there's the river keeper with our students from Eastern and Mystic Falls, which unfortunately tested pretty high. And then on top of that, of course, we have the mega floods. You can't talk about geology in our area without the Missoula flood scouring through 300 feet deep, 60 miles an hour. But as they kind of slowed down towards the end, they deposit sand and gravel deposits like crazy in our area. This is a big economic, part of our world. But what's crazy about that is we actually have some little channels in the West Plains that will allow water to go really fast. Water can flow about 1,000 feet per day, not 1 foot in 1 year. And this is remarkably faster than the basalt. So water is preferentially going to flow through there. We have a little diagram how they filled up there, but hopefully it shows up on the, if you guys got a PDF of it. So we took all our results and we were able to put for PFAS, and you can see that there's a pretty high level. So we're talking about 500 to 20,000 parts per trillion. the Drinking Water Standards 4 again, by Fairchild. And then you can see Spokane International Airport, and there's a couple other little hot spots. But they generally follow those little ridges that you can see. Those are actually drainages, what we call paleo drainages that we mapped out, Eastern students, filled with sand and gravel. So if any surface contamination comes in, it goes in these little old channels in the sand and gravel and then flows towards the Spokane River. So you can even see up at 7 Mile, where there's a pretty high hot point there, about 100 parts per trillion in a lot of the wells that we tested. And this is the big thing, I think, especially for like, future hazardous areas. This is almost like a groundwater model on its own, right? It shows you which way the groundwater is flowing and where contamination will generally pile up for future people that build wells. So here's a place where we've sampled all these wells that are black. And then the yellow ones, we can still see some of these yellow wells that we have never sampled before and nobody's ever sampled that we know of. Are still located out there. And so we're working with the PFAS task force with Al French's group to try and get more state money and federal money to get more testing and then whole house filtration for people, especially in this area. So in the audience, yeah, if you're interested in this, the Department of Ecology has a PFAS update email list where you can go on there. They're really helpful for communicating information. Oh no, my diagrams. Scott asked me to, or Scott, Mr. Director Chesney, I don't know how to say it. The amazing Scott Chesney asked me to just kind of show you some highlights of the study that we found besides just where the PFAS generally is. This is usually in color, but it's all good. It kind of shows you opposite the lower left Spokane International Airport, where they know they tested with it. At this northern ends of that are some wetlands where you can get up to about 100 parts per trillion PFAS just kind of washing off the runway there. That groundwater flows down, and then if you think about it, the basalt where you get to the Palisades has just been chopped off by Missoula floods, and so if there's water flowing in the rocks, it just pours out as springs, especially in the springtime, right? And so we can see Garden Springs and Mystic Falls, the canyons that those little drainages come off those have up to 70 or 80 parts per trillion in there, and then that goes off into Latah Creek. So Latah Creek, where we first measure it, is non-detect, but by the time we measure it right before it goes to the Spokane River, we start to pick up, a little bit of PFAS in Latah Creek going to the Spokane River. Another kind of interesting thing to me in Medical Lake is on Craig Road, and you guys are going to do some great work for the county, I think, making that road better. This is this cross section, so we kind of took a slice, and this laser pointer doesn't quite work, but it's right. You can see a yellow line right here. So it goes from 4 lakes almost up to what we call No Name Ditch on Craig Road. You know where Craig Road kind of does that weird little jog where the township and range changes. Well, we can see if we go out to that No Name Ditch area, that's the main stormwater coming off of Fairchild Air Force Base. And so they get levels up to 20,000 parts per trillion flowing off of the base through a channel, through a gate that goes out. And the property owners there all have it in their deeds that they'll allow stormwater to flow through. And so it's legal for that to come out. There's no regulation on stormwater. But then right there, it enters the ground. Just at Craig Road at this paleo channel. And so we can find these contours, those red lines right there show that if you go from 10,000, 20,000 parts per trillion down to 5, and it's actually going up gradient towards 4 lakes. And so Craig Road well for Medical Lake is starting to get a sniff. It started at 2 parts per trillion, and then it's 3. It's been hovering about 3, especially in springtime. We pick that up. And then it kind of dissipates. And then we pick up a little bit more in 4 lakes, and we're not exactly sure where that's coming from, but there's a little bit. The Craig Road was kind of an interesting one to me because PFAS was moving up gradient where it's not supposed to go. And when we did our groundwater modeling, so we took all those layers and we pretended like water flowed through them. We actually found that at Fairchild Air Force Base, Spokane International Airport, all the city of Airway Heights all bring in water from the Spokane River. And so there's leaky pipes and they're irrigating and all these other things. So that water actually mounds up and piles up. And so if you think about water pushing up, it's not going to stay happy there, right? I mean, water needs to go somewhere. And so it starts to flow in all directions, including up gradient. Towards Medical Lake or Craig Road. And so we can find wells all along Craig Road that follow this gradient of PFAS coming up. And you can even see at Craig Road here in the lower right-hand corner, that in the springtime, when that water comes back up to where the soil gets contaminated, it gets higher and higher. And then during the, as it goes to winter, the water levels go down. And then, or in the summer, the water levels go down. And then the PFAS is kind of left in the soil because it is hydrophobic. And then the water comes back up in spring. And so we get this oscillating level, just continuing to go up. So naturally, again, the groundwater should flow to the northeast, but when we mound up that groundwater, it kind of does change our system. That's kind of one of the bigger things we found in the study. And I'm also, a big proponent of talking to wonderful folks like Mike Wiltz and those folks. And so one of the things we're looking for is no name ditch. The government does consider it to be stormwater at this time, and so they're not putting a filter on it. And I'm trying to share that with anybody. Please talk to your representatives, and say, hey, we need to stop this, stop this spigot, so to speak, with high levels of PFAS coming off of the base. And they know about, we've all known about for 10 years. And Mark Henry, one of the hydrogeologists at Fairchild, was amazing. They're all wonderful people. I'm on the Restoration Advisory Board for Fairchild. But this is just something I'm trying to get people to talk up about, because it's continually putting out PFAS into the West Plains. Even, if it rains today. Another cool thing, we're almost done, I promise. Age the groundwater. You can actually do radiocarbon aging as the water flow goes down through it infiltrates in the soil, it picks up carbon. And so we did a bunch of sampling. We compared it to stuff that was about 20 or 12 years ago when they did radiocarbon. And we found that our oldest age is about 10,000 years old. So the Missoula floods came through, the Ice Age floods shoved water into the aquifer. But then when we go out, before that, they were constantly older. So we're getting younger and younger ages with time. Which is kind of a bummer. And there's our students, they were getting interviewed by KSPS right there. There's a little special on it, which is kind of great if you want to Google that. When we did that radiocarbon and figured out it was getting younger, we also did isotopes. And this is a little more intense, and I apologize about that, but we got oxygen isotope and hydrogen. Stuff's everywhere, this water, this hydrogen isotope. But what we can find is that blue line is where rain, it's the meteoric water line, we call it the rain line. That's where the rain is. And if you go down to the lower line with the small blue and green, go Seahawks. I think the Super Bowl was about the time we made this graph. That was our older data. And then our data is now encroaching and moving towards rainwater. So our groundwater levels are more or less kind of going down, except for the shallow stuff. And then the age is getting younger. And now we're starting to look more like rain. So we're definitely becoming more dependent upon rain for our recharge in the West Plains, like in a big way. Which kind of scares me because I don't know about you guys, but if I look at the climate predictions, they're not predicting more rain to come for us. There's our students actually sampling rain. So we sampled rain for PFAS and looked at the chemistry of it. Another kind of neat thing to see, especially as planning commissions, is that if you go to a lake or a river, sometimes foam is common, right? I mean, if it's windy, it'll whip up this foam. It's natural. And we sampled it, and it turned out to be about 10,000 parts per trillion higher than the water itself. And so some states are starting to put up signs along beaches that says don't play with the foam. And that's important to me because I first moved to Medical Lake. The first thing I saw was that foam. I'm like, boom, pop it around my kid's head. Whoa, at least there's a reason they don't like me, I guess now. You guys are solid. Okay. But the foam is it's super high. And so it's very, very contaminated. So that's kind of an interesting thing that we found in Deep Creek and then a couple other creeks that we had. So the last little thing right here is that we came up with this whole model of how groundwater is moving around in this. And this again is a cross section chopped in half. We have localized aquifers in the granite. So if you go to Four Lakes up on the hill, those people's water is about 200, 300 years old. It's all just slowly percolated down into the granite, but it's not really going anywhere unless you get springs in springtime flowing off into the lakes. The lakes, for the most part, stay consistent until the groundwater levels go down, and then the lakes pour into the groundwater and feed that groundwater, and that all flows to the northeast. As we go up to the northeast, it goes to the Spokane River, essentially. And it, normally we would think the shallow stuff should all stay in the upper basalt right there, but when we go through there, the Latah unit, the clay layer between them, sometimes it's there, it's gone. Sometimes there's fractures, like little faults, the Cheney fracture zone, or unlined wells. Some people will just drill a well. It used to be legal to just drill a well with no lining whatsoever. And then aquifer can go between, the water can pour between different aquifers. And then those paleo channels also allow for that contamination to move around different directions. So it gets a little complicated in the West Plains. When I talk about Cheney, it was nice because it's just layer cake. All the contamination is just in shallow basalt. It's super easy to say, hey, you have a shallow well, test it, get a filter really well. Then it comes out, you can see the springs right there as well, and then it goes out to the Spokane River. So what's next? We have a report. It's with ecology, all our data. The second revisions just got submitted to ecology. We're supporting as much as we can, filtering the no-name ditch so it stops pouring out to the area. We're writing up some journals. And then we talked about, Cheney Water Well 5, and then Needham Hill, also the Nike site. That seems to be why Four Lakes might have some PFAS in it. And we're working with quite a few people on that. And then of course, the Spokane County PFAS Task Force is a big proponent. They had $7.2 million to find whole house filtration for those people with the highest levels. And then we just got another grant from the Spokane River. So in the lower part here, you can see 30 stars that our students and high school students will come out and sample this summer and then into the fall. So thank you. Yeah, my name's Chad. I talked fast because Scott said I only got 20 minutes. He said originally 10 minutes, but there's some pictures right there.
questions from,
I think we should applaud, actually.
Well, thank you.
questions for Ted?
I have about 4 questions. It appears on the map that most of the contamination.
Could you, we want to be able to record, if you would.
Yeah. It appears that most of the contamination is coming from the municipal airport and Fairchild, according to your map.
Yes.
And so that seems to be the source of a lot of this. And I want to ask you, you mentioned, and I don't even know what this chemical is that they spread out, but you mentioned that they removed one of the compounds from it and replaced it with fluorine.
Oh, yeah.
Does that involve fluoride or fluoride on the periodic chart?
Yeah, so,
Fluorine?
yeah, fluoride is, well, I'll say.
I'll just tell everybody, that's fluorine, chlorine, bromine, and iodine are extremely oxidizing agents. They pull electrons off of other things very strongly, and they can be very, very powerful contaminants.
Yeah.
Chemically. Then I wanted to ask you, what are the parts per trillion in Lake Talk Creek did you find going into this Spokane?
So if you're at Falchion, it was non-detect, and it was about, I think, 2 to 3 when you go up to, right before you get to Spokane.
About 2 to 3. Okay, and that's below the national.
It is below, yeah. But you should never drink surface water, like, that's.
Well, it seems to me unless it seems obvious what the contaminant is, and if they don't shut that down, it's very happening.
Yeah, I mean, they are actively working on Spokane International Airport. Well, they're starting to.
And maybe they should change the chemical makeup of the retardant.
Yeah, no, you can't buy it in the United States anymore. They don't.
Okay.
But it is very useful.
Thank you. Those are in.
And the airports in Fairchild had to do it. It was a regulation that they had to train every so often with it. And the amount of jet fuel they had at Fairchild, they just practiced a lot. It made sense to do that at the time. I'm not blaming anybody, except for the people that said it was safe first.
More comments?
Or open it for anything related to the
Yeah.
CIO.
Yellow cards, exactly. Logan, you can talk too.
You mentioned something in Four Lakes, Chad. Could you say that again? What was the source that you think there, or the challenge there?
Oh, for Four Lakes, right now it's the Cheney School District. There's the Three Springs High School is up at the old Nike site. So it's an old missile silo. Lots of jet fuel there. And so as precaution, sometimes they'll have AFFF at the top of those Nike sites. And there's a couple of situations where it's not quite disposed of, where they did it in a timely or very quick manner, when it's potentially spilled quite a bit. And so there was a huge TCE leak that came off of that, and some of the wells down gradient seem to have a little bit of PFAS in it, especially in the Andrews Road area.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, the type of PFAS is slightly different though. It's not quite like your PFAS and PFHXS, which is what the AFFF looks like. That was a lot of acronyms. So.
Comments, critical area ordinance or related to Richard's conference presentation.
Yellow cards. Excuse me, your yellow cards.
We do. We only have one CIO. That's Julia McHugh. The rest are zone codes.
Okay.
Well, that's been James Albee, but was that about the water?
Me?
The water,
Oh, no, those
we-
questions.
we're
It'll be
talking about
different.
the
It'll be
code.
something different.
That was a separate issue. I'm just.
This, we should allow you to speak at another time.
Yeah.
You have another topic you want to talk on?
Other than just what I
Yes.
just said, yes, about the growth management.
Okay, thank you. Right, Julia, go ahead.
Leave this up.
Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. Thank everybody for being here. My comments today, in order for this document, this critical areas ordinance to be valid ahead of a final sign off, Spokane County must first update the aquifer susceptibility map and the critical aquifer recharge area documents. using a model that accounts for known surface and subsurface contaminants and reflected within the maps and text of the final draft. You just heard from Dr. Pritchard, the West Plains is replete with chemical threats and contamination to our drinking water. Our safe drinking water is threatened on the West Plains. Existing known forever groundwater contamination across the West Plains aquifer is unmentioned in the existing critical areas ordinance that's being updated today. And this sole source aquifer is not adequately protected in this working draft that we have before us. Paleo channels are not mentioned, or in the 28 document that's replacing, or mapped on the aquifer susceptibility maps. Could you point out the 5 paleo channels, please, Scott? So you can see what these are, these deep crevasses where the lava didn't come together and it filled in with ice age floods material, which is very transmissive, and that's where our highest PFAS levels are, not to mention off the ends of the airport runway. So 2 state agencies responded with comments. Nothing from the State Department of Health Division of Drinking Water, nothing from Spokane Regional Health District in the form of comments, and I believe this was distributed to all of these folks. Nothing from the Department of Natural Resources. I think we need to go back to that drawing board and get their comments on this because it is as yet an inadequate document. The 5 of the comments that I made were reviewed by the team. Thank you to the team. But all of them say further policy discussion by the county. Well, that's 5 serious elements and serious issues that should have been discussed 2.5 or 3 years ago, not here at the tail end of this comp plan finishing up. So we need very drastically and quickly, we need these policy discussions, 5 different topics that pertain to our health, safety, and welfare, and also pertain to the rest of the county, of course. There's contaminated drinking water all over the place. So the emissions in this working draft represent a serious disservice to the current and future county residents. And at this juncture, it will produce a reckless county legacy well beyond 2046, which is the 20-year period that this is supposed to last. Do you have any questions for me? And I also want to thank Dr. Pritchard for once again elucidating what's going on out there and making it understandable and making it, at least in my mind, very clear, very plain that we've got serious problems that we need to protect and we need to create some boundaries that this critical area ordinance does not yet achieve. I want to see these things included. I live out here. If any of you lived out there, perhaps you'd be more aroused by this, but even though my hair is not in flames, it is on fire. And I'm asking you all to really seriously figure out how to comb through this document and find out why we are so dissatisfied. We, being the West Plains people, who have to drink this spooge every single day, bathe in it, feed the livestock, cease having gardens in any shape or form. So we're being deprived in a very serious way. And not only that, but Mr. Pritchard's one of his last comments has to do with the age of the drinking water. The recharge is happening less and less. It is now dependent on rain, and we know that we're getting less and less rain, which means we're not only faced with a quality issue out, the massive quality or water quality issue out on the West Plains, but a quantity issue. We have a number of people whose wells are showing evidence of coming up short. So no water, no system going anywhere. Water drives the system. And I hope that's come through in the dozen or so times I've been in front of you. But it does not come through in this draft document, and I've submitted additional comments and so on, and I just talked to Scott about those ahead of the meeting. So, thank you, Scott. You have done a fine job, and it's hurting fish for sure, as far as policy, and not a job many of us would want, but certainly we're here to critique it. Thank you very much. And no questions.
I've got a question.
Yes, sir, Mr. Rainer.
I grew up outside of Flint, Michigan,
Oh, you live, and
and I
you've had
haven't
some
thought
health
about Flint,
issues.
Michigan until you were talking, so. How different is the lead pipes in Flint, Michigan with what you're dealing with?
Well, you can replace lead pipes. And they can find other water sources other than the Flint River. On the West Plains,
Well, that's my concern is how do we solve this problem?
well, these filtration, whole house, interior and exterior for the livestock that people depend on the income for, that they can at least filter this sole source drinking water to an agreeable, acceptable, medically acceptable level. So it's filtration that's at the very top of our list, unless a property is within range of the extension of a municipal system like Airway Heights, or the city of Spokane has on the north side of Highway 2, they've got a big old water pipe out there. But we live on top of fractured basalt. It's very unlikely you're gonna challenge 2-inch or 4-inch water lines down a two-mile road to pick up half a dozen houses. Not gonna happen. So it's filtration that we need, and we hope that you will also advocate for that. Anything else? Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. McHugh. Other comments? Comments online?
None.
Anyone else in the audience would like to, members of the commission?
Mr. Chair, let me address part of that quickly because it's useful. When you undertake a comprehensive planning effort like this, and Clyde will remember from 2001 when the county did its first major effort that led to this plan. And you discover a lot of things that you didn't know when you start. And that's part of what we do. In one sense, it's, you know, you kick over a rock and you find something underneath that you didn't anticipate. Well, now you have to deal with it. We have learned a great deal about West Plains and water from people in this audience, Ms. McHugh, Ms. Horn, Dr. Pritchard. And it may sound like it's late in the game, but once we know a little more of what we're doing, we can start to incorporate that into planning documents and into documents that will help guide growth and permitting. So it may seem a little disjointed at times, but it's all coming together as best we can. And it's providing a much better and more thorough perspective on the West Plains than we had before we started. So I think it's a victory. Yes, it's in year 4 of a 4-year process, but we're still here. We're still working on it. With that, if it's the commission's pleasure, we can move on to development codes.
As Scott said, I've got to be getting old. I was around in the 2001 when we were starting to go through the growth management, and Dr. Pitcher, you were just a young man playing in the pond out there floating a boat. But anyway, the point being is that Scott is correct. Here on the Planning Commission, we have always got listening ears, much too many times, as Mrs. McHugh is saying, we're not listening. We are listening. We have been listening. We have done a lot of movement towards trying to solve some issues. But it seemed like just what Scott said, every time we turn a corner, well, something else pops up new. I just want to say from my heart goes out to you. I understand what you're saying. I do take it with great interest of what's happening. I wish I had an answer that's just like that, but I don't. And I haven't heard anybody that said that they got the exact answer. And I just wanted a few minutes just to say that. Thank you very much, and thank you for me sharing.
For the record, Clyde has not served on this commission continuously since 2001. Just so.
I've been off and on.
You've been off and on, even more things. Other comments? It's been a good, robust discussion. Dr. Pritchard, thank you so much. Your expertise is very valuable. Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shifting gears a bit from the very broad critical areas perspective of the world into first look at some specifics in coding. As you will recall from 2024, at least, we have been talking about a different approach to comprehensive plan policy and notably in terms of development codes, zoning, and the regulatory structure. And that was based around something called placemaking, which was the fundamental part was to say, let's find a way to build or try to encourage the building of villages and neighborhoods instead of just subdivisions that are one next to each other and don't always even connect to each other. So what we've got before you today is some more, or the first crack at some specific changes to the Spokane County zoning code to reflect how that will come into play. And while we get started on this, I want to ask the chairman for perhaps an indulgence. We'd like to treat this as a working work session, not just as me lecturing and talking to you about slides. We'd like to entertain members of the audience who are in the professions, who have things to say at your pleasure, but interrupt at any time for questions or make some comments at the end that might be interactive in more than just a quick 3-minute burst. I think that might be useful to hear from those perspectives.
Chair takes no exception. So it's fine to us. It's, the more contribution, the more input, the better for us. Yeah, the good of our content.
So generally speaking, we're rebuilding these codes to, as we said, to try to build walkable communities, to try to, there's so many things to bring into this. Walkable communities provide a better quality of life in most cases. They provide some open spaces, so sometimes as simple as a front porch or a front yard. But oftentimes, if the uses are allowed rather than being prohibited, you can have small shops, you can have small employment centers within shorter trips of distance than you have now. You've seen this diagram a couple of times, but it's important to recognize that these are real opportunities of mixes of housing within a single project. That's not 40 acres of single family housing. It's 40 acres of about 6 types of housing, and it can all be done economically if you plan for it up front and if you allow it. If you allow the market, architects, builders to shape something that is meeting needs, you can get things to happen. And we like many places in Washington and the nation, we're still struggling with building enough housing for people, and especially affordable housing. Part of it is we've got regulations that date back forever, and ours go back to the very beginnings of zoning in 1916, which was done for 2 reasons, chiefly. One, the official reason was to make high-rise buildings step back from the street as they went up to provide light and air down to the street level rather than canyons in Manhattan. The second reason was to separate uses, separate the slaughterhouses in the day and the meatpacking district from the theater district. So zoning came into play to be a separation of uses. One of the classic ones in planning, Ambler versus Euclid, Northern Ohio outside of Cleveland, the village of Ambler, or the village of Euclid rather, was more idyllic, and it created a zoning code or created a land use code to prohibit heavier industrial style development from encroaching into the village from Cleveland. Ultimately, that was found to be lawful using what are called the police powers granted to municipalities in the state. And so that became kind of the first codification of zoning, and zoning then was all about separating uses. Our code is, and they're typically called Euclidean zoning. Our code currently follows that pattern exactly from literally 100 years ago. It's all about separating different uses rather than how you can grow vibrant communities. And the ironic part is, as 1916, 1920s, in that pre-war, between the war era, so many communities built themselves up around manufacturing plants that were, in an area where the highway went through, or where the bridge crossed the river, or where the railroad came through, and the homes built around them. So they had these mixes of uses long before there was zoning, and then zoning came into play to say, well, we have to push this all aside and do that. And it was highlighted by what were called the auto-oriented suburbs of the post-war era. When you had the automobile come along, it's like, I can get there now. So huge history of how that happened. And here, it results in what we have today, which is a 3-part residential, LDR, MDR, HDR version. And what we're proposing is to eliminate that and move it back into Back to the Future. Back into something we're calling neighborhood zoning, which is to allow and encourage a mix of uses and a variety of types in a what we call a by right category, so that it can be done by a builder without having to ask for an amendment to go from a density level of this to a density level of that. With those increased densities come obligations for neighborhood scale and character, so you don't build something that doesn't fit into that village or that neighborhood. But it allows for a huge degree of, or I should simply say a significant degree of market flexibility that we don't have now. Since I've worked with you over these last 5 years, we've processed dozens of comprehensive plan amendments that have done nothing other than change density levels from low to medium, medium to high. That's not really a very good way of looking at planning in a comprehensive way. It's doing it as reacting to the market. Well, this is a chance of saying, we don't know how the market's going to work, but if we create this thing from the start, we can order it in a way so that it can do this in a way that provides quality of life and doesn't provide this disconnected piece of a bigger unit dropping into a single family neighborhood. So it's about design. And that's been a chief pattern that you've heard from us for years, is density is a function of design. Good design can overcome a lot of fears about density. So again, another sketch of multi-family units, single family attached units, open space being created. It's not that unusual. It's being done in many places, and we think it will serve the edges of Spokane very well. One really good example is our core city, City of Spokane, particularly on the north side. If you look at the zoning map, and it's hard to put up at this scale, about every, I don't know, 5, 6, 8 blocks on what are key arterials, you'll see one little dot of orange amidst all the residential zoning. Those are the neighborhood retail zones. They were old leftover corner stores or taverns or something from the pre-war era when the cities were built kind of before the automobile era. When the city adopted its centers and corridors, those were kind of just left to go away. No, we're gonna create these centers and everything has to go here. And yet the city wants to say that we're building a walkable community. They have the walkable community. And some of those may not be viable under traditional standards, but if you let them happen, and one of the things that the city did do 10 years ago was create a step in the zoning code that said, if any of those uses that had a commercial purpose at any time in their history and now have been converted to residential, could go back to being a commercial use without a comp plan amendment or without a zoning change. So it tried to say you can come back to life. That philosophy is a little bit about what we're talking here, and we've got a good example in our core city. So there are really 4 major categories of this. 2 in neighborhood residential, simply because we're very creative people, we call them neighborhood residential 1 and neighborhood residential 2. NR1 is an infill. It is essentially the new version of LDR and MDR. It generally protects those values because one of the things that you've heard over and over is change is frightening to people that own property. They want to know what's happening next door. They want to know what's happening down the block. The NR1 zoning will provide that security because it will codify essentially what is allowed now in that neighborhood residential 1 or in the LDR and MDR zone. So it provides protection of property values for those that are already in place. The NR2, and by the way, what that means is for the say remaining vacant parcels in the urban growth area that are already zoned LDR, MDR, it provides some assurance that in most cases, those are not going to change from relatively low intensity developments. It may still be duplexes, triplexes, or fourplexes, but it's probably, this would prevent it from being anything more intense than that. NR2 is more of the true neighborhood sense because it not only allows the full range of residential densities from single family detached to medium style garden style apartments, but it encourages a mix of non-residential uses. It encourages separating or leaving land for small shops, for small retail, for small employment and business areas. Things that have an intensity that fits in a neighborhood, not in an industrial park. And so it's a very different approach. Our zoning now doesn't allow that. We've seen it in so many other places. Some places it's called traditional neighborhood design. Others, a version of it, transit-oriented development. It's how you put things together where you can get to many places with walking, biking, or a very short drive, instead of having to go 2 or 3 miles to the nearest Rosauers every day to get your supplies. And so this will be a chance for newer areas, if there is any modification to a UGA boundary, but bigger parcels, maybe 10 acres and up, allowed to be planned in a more master planned approach to start with, to lay out this in a way so that it can be done. If you remember that diagram up front, it's not just the mix of uses, it's also street connectivity. It's having grids so you can get in and out of your area in multiple ways. Dr. Pritchard mentioned Medical Lake and the fires. So much of what happened there was because there was one way in, one way out. You didn't have an escape route. And if you remember, you may remember, during that time, another fire popped up over on Thorpe Road, not too far from the railroad tunnels. Same thing. You've got very limited ways in and out because none of these roads are part of a grid. And the grid doesn't have to be rectilinear. It can be curving. But you need, it's good to have multiple ways in and out, like a traditional grid, South Hill, North Hill, where you can move around. So that connectivity is important in neighborhood residential too. Neighborhood business is a little bit of an inverted version of that. And I'll show you some examples here in a minute. But it's saying this is an area that is predominantly set up for relatively low intensity businesses, offices, retail, small shops. Again, not big shipping and receiving, not all night operations, not noise, vibration, dust. But now we're going to not only allow, but encourage some multifamily development to be within proximity of that. Right now, for example, our light industrial area prohibits residential. In some cases, this would allow people to walk to work instead of have to have perhaps multiple automobiles. So it's refocusing that, but again, it's blending these uses into certain areas. So we'll go over a couple of these. So I said NR1 is kind of a restatement of LDR. It blends, it allows for some creativity for existing subdivisions. And what it would do is it would also suggest that if a new subdivision is being planned next to the existing one, that there are some at least obligations to try to be compatible with your neighbors, to try to fit in. You get that connectivity, street connectivity, size and density of units. Doesn't have to match exactly. The economics of the times don't work that way. You can't build 2-acre lot subdivisions anymore. Nobody can afford that. Like $2 million homes to make that work. So you've got smaller and larger that have to go together. But again, good design can overcome a lot of those issues. NR2, and we use this just as a quick example. That's the southeast part of the metro core, south of the city of Spokane Valley, where there've been a patchwork of subdivisions over the last 20 years popping in. And these are 3 target areas for UGA discussion. And so this NR1 would be a way of taking these smaller sites and trying to develop them in a way that's compatible with their neighbors. But also to the point of for example, if that was a big residential cluster and this was a piece coming in, this would allow or encourage a corner of that to be left open for a C-store or something else to provide that perhaps neighborhood focus in the existing neighborhoods. NR2, the more master plan approach, is for bigger areas that are really yet to be developed, both within the UGA and potentially outside if there is an expansion, and then we'll talk about that in a little bit too. West Plains is one good example. The North Metro area around it, kind of between Whitworth University and the Meadworks project on Newport Highway. That's an area you've seen many comp plan amendments in that area. That's an area that is changing its use and density almost in real time. So rather than a piece here and a piece here and a piece here over time, let's look at how can this fit together in a way to provide some order and confidence from both property owners and investors that this is an area that can evolve in a way that is well planned and thought of instead of as a haphazard approach. As we've heard, it's not on the slide, but that by example, as we're down into that lower West Plains area, the West Terraces, that's the area of significant flooding hazard. Dr. Pritchard talked about the basalt layers in the aquifer, the bottom of that, where the aquifer comes down here and the water can't get through it anymore. You know, where I grew up in the Midwest, that bottom layer may have been 1,000 feet below the soil. Here, it's nearly at the surface, which is why, among other reasons, why they've got this flooding problem every time it rains. There's no place for that water to percolate or to go. When you especially put impervious surface on the top of it, it makes it even worse. So thinking about how that comes into neighborhood development means you don't do a subdivision that is nothing but single-family homes and driveways. You think of a place, in Clyde's business, you use your landscape architects to figure out how can you use stormwater management that may be an amenity when it's not raining? How can you use it in a way to create maybe green corridors through a place that you wouldn't otherwise? So it can serve dual purposes. It doesn't have to be an expensive thing of its own. It can serve multiple purposes. Off track a little bit, but here's where that idea of getting those neighborhood scale businesses would be encouraged, and really if you and the Board of County Commissioners ultimately agree with comments and things that we hear, it would have a requirement. It wouldn't be allowed to say, well, you can do this if you want. It would be, no, you have to plan for a fully included neighborhood. You've got to make accommodation for these other uses. They may not happen at the same time. Developers may need to form partnerships or joint ventures to make it happen. But if you think about it in advance, the housing developer will be able to say, look, I'm building these amenities that are going to be here. Maybe that's going to give me a better price on my house. And the commercial builder is going to say, perhaps, the adage of retail follows rooftops. It's like, well, there's no market here to even put a small C-store. But, oh, by the way, now we've got a partner that's going to build, 50 homes here in Lincoln through a trail, another 50 or 100 homes. You can start to make those economics work. Not always easy, but it's possible, at least if you open the door to let that happen. The neighborhood business, as I said, is that sort of inverted version where it's business first and residential second, but it's allowing and encouraging, particularly multifamily residential, into areas that are dominated by businesses and retail and other things. And you've heard from us, and probably some of you have studied and been to other places where you see this leftover pattern of retail from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, where there are these shopping centers, power centers, the big box stores. They have the proverbial parking field designed for the Saturday after Thanksgiving. Most of the rest of the year, half that parking field or more is vacant. It's empty. Here's a chance to use those spaces. In some cases, it makes sense. In some cases, it's expensive. But to include different uses in those areas where you can walk to stores, you could walk to businesses. And the North Metro is a good example of that. That lower hatched area is roughly around the Rockwood retirement center. And so it's got a lot of uses. It's got things going on. You can, even in the existing zoning, you can see all those multiple colors. Those are differences in zoning. That northern part is across from the Meadworks project and Costco. That's where you've seen, I think 4 or 5 comp plan amendments in the last few years moving in that direction. So here's a way of saying, all right, the market is moving this way. Let's plan for it in a more meaningful way so it doesn't seem as haphazard. We can plan for traffic impacts better. We can plan for new roads. We can plan for crossings because we're not looking at one project after another, where no single project triggers those requirements. But if you look at the entire thing, you can say, we're going to do this, and everybody shares in, perhaps it's a follow-on cost, or perhaps it's a mitigation that's built into something that happened. So here's an example two photos, same place, side by side. The pointer doesn't let me go. The one on the left is from 2000. This is Madison, Wisconsin. Now, the upper east-west road is University Avenue, and the one straight up and down north-south is called Midvale Boulevard. On the left side, you can see a very traditional shopping center. Department store in the middle. There was a big bookstore on the south, a grocery store on the north, shops in between, and you can see the giant parking field around that, a huge amount of land use. In the early 2000s, the photo on the left, on the right comes into play. And it's really interesting because in that parking field in front of that shopping center, you now see a street in front. You see buildings facing that are commercial shops and small offices, structured parking in between, and a row of townhomes on the front. So it's created room for 30 or 32 housing units that were formerly in a parking lot, a whole new set of retail stores in the same area, and it's revitalized the bigger boxes to the point that up where the date is 2000 on that first photo, you can see a small, it was an apartment complex with the residential commons in the middle. That's now a Target store. So a big box moved into the same area. And so this is a great visual example to say, you can use these lands in a different way and not harm the use behind them. That shopping area is more vibrant than it was in 2000 because they've added and built these things in. So this is a classic version of what we call neighborhood business. Next one, and the last of these, is regional commercial. And this is one we wanted to make sure we had an accommodation for big retail, big commercial, big office development. Not on our horizon right now. The economy is not exactly looking for Class A office space. And there could be there's a good argument for us to be working with our colleagues across the river to say, if we're really serious about building new office space, let's look at the vacant lots downtown and connect them into a skywalk system. But nonetheless, this allows for residential to go into a business park or an office park, which is traditionally something you'd never think of. Again, it allows that short trip to work, a bike trip, a walk trip to work. When you build in the residential component next to a big office, you also get restaurants, you get hotels, you get other amenities that come in. So it's been done. This is a picture of the upper center around that pond is American Family Life Insurance headquarters. And this turned into an office park that had that residential component. So again, we're not talking about things that have never been tried in other areas. We're going to go through some of the details on it. And by the way, I'll stop for a second if there are any kind of questions about the concept of what we're doing before we jump into the weeds, as they say, and from you or anybody in the audience or anybody that's online.
And be a good time for a little Q&A from Julia.
A couple of things. Thank you, Julia McHugh, Palisades Neighborhood. I think we're all agreed that housing is an absolute critical issue to be addressed. But one of the things that's happening at the base of the West Plains or at the bottom of the Sunset Hill where Government Way crosses is there is now becoming, excuse me, a cluster of development for unhoused people. And at the top of Sunset Hill, there were a number of small drive-in motoring motels. And those are also being looked at, which will create an unforeseen or probably an ignored density of unhoused folks who we know after Camp Hope can wreak havoc with a neighborhood and with this health, safety, and welfare and the peace of a neighborhood. And since the developments that are happening at the bottom of the hill, including and at the top of it, the old Spokane house, you don't go by there without seeing a motor home with the doors open and the trash on the ground, or could come to Indian Canyon. So the cluster of the housing has not been addressed in that in your new alternatives. So that's one big concern because it's coming out to the West Plains. It's not going to the South Hill. It's not going to Liberty Lake. It's not going to the 5 Mile. It's coming out to the West Plains. And then the final is that that northeast corridor, the maps are not reflecting the most impactful thing that this town has built in decades, which is a north-south freeway. And when you build roads, you will then ultimately end up with just a bloom of development. So by not showing that, it's a little disingenuous to show where housing might work. And in fact, just off the graphic is the monstrous north-south freeway, which is going to move people north and south and east and west. But it's not reflecting what's ahead of us with this new construction. Thank you.
Anyone else?
One quick point about that. The maps show a little bit because they're hard to put on the screen. It is precisely because of the North Spokane corridor that we're looking at that Newport Highway, Hastings, Farwell area, because we do anticipate it's going to have a significant amount of development pressure in the next 5 years as that corridor connects to I-90. So we are very much looking at why. It's not just a random saying, well, it's changed. It's saying, here's why, and we better get ahead of it because there will be growth pressure out there. So that notwithstanding. Moving on. You will recognize the format of this is very much like the current zoning code. It looks at the classifications across the top, the various criteria down the side, and the criteria that are being looked at here. I want to stress that what we're putting forth before you is the first draft of what can be an operational zone matrix to build what we want to build. We have reached out to the Home Builders Association, a number of other builders, some of which are here, and said we're ready to sit down and talk with you about this. We've sent out the draft that was in your packet and was posted online. And we're looking actively at the investment and development community to say, how does this work and will it meet the markets that you're anticipating? So in addition to looking at how does it affect current residents, current property owners, how does this affect the quality of life? We also want to make sure that we're not putting something together that is so restrictive that it is financially infeasible to build anything. Because again, we have to grow housing. So you can see some of the changes. And I'm sure in your time on the commission, you've memorized the existing codes, so you can see the differences in lot sizes and other things that have been posted up here. Yes? No? No. We're looking at changing minimum lot sizes. We're looking at changing dimensions. We're adding, like you can see in the NR2 zone, 8-unit buildings up to 12 units on larger lots. And so we're looking for some feedback on where this is going to go, along with kind of the dimensional standards of setbacks being adhered, building heights and so on in that. And then just a few example comments to go through, and then we'll pause and let some others give you some thoughts and comments, I hope, from the public and online. But as we've said, there's zoning components and then there's urban design. Good design overcomes a lot of fear of density because you design things in standards, building size, building mass, building orientation that fits into places that exist, or that you build it at a scale together and provides both a quality of life and value. So all of these standards are things that would be considered in plan view, ideas for how you can combine things. In this case, shared driveways, individual driveways, front yards, separation, duplex style buildings on the side. And one of the things it doesn't really show up too much here. We're looking at getting away from just a density requirement of so many units per acre and looking at coverages. How much coverage do you need? Can you get on a site that makes sense? And that helps drive lot size standards. So that's a distinction that we've worked on. This is a kind of a dull graphic, but it talks about what are things that are subject to these standards? Facades, windows, doors, overhangs, without changing, without mandating them, as saying to designers and architects, here, we want you to take a look at this and add this into your design. And all sorts of options. There's nothing that is forced or finished. And so this kind of shared lane idea, curbless streets, trail examples. And on the right-hand side, you can see how those trails are part of park systems open space. On the upper right photo, but the left half of that upper right photo, you can see a mid-block trail connection that would not be there if it wasn't part of the master planned idea. And then as you get into that mix of uses, how do you set the tone for what becomes a good feel for that neighborhood, commercial neighborhood business, neighborhood amenity area? And it's things like transparency standards, windows rather than walls, windows that are transparent, not just covered in advertising. And then as you get into the higher density things, being able to shape those in ways that they are appealing to others and put a good face onto the street. And to the degree that Spokane County is going to have higher density development is really unlikely in our urban growth areas for the most part. That could change in that upper metro or the north metro area. Again, North Spokane corridor, going to be a significant employment center along Newport Highway. Multi-Care Medical has bought 30 acres and Shriners Hospital's 10 acres adjacent to that. That is going to be a major employment center. So it's possible with transit and other things, you could start to see podium buildings, 4 or 5 floors of residential over retail or over an office because there's an employment center. Down the road, for sure, but again, we're looking at a 20-year horizon. How does this work when you might have 2 or 3 million square feet of office and medical space in the proximity? So that was kind of redundant. And then we've talked about connectivity and road standards. We are working with our public works colleagues. They are in the midst of updating the county road standards. And so we're working collaboratively to say, how can we create county road standards that fit this neighborhood model, but aren't so far into an urban form that the county can't afford them, which is the classic challenge of urban growth area development is you want to build these walkable neighborhoods and villages, but they often ask for amenities, not just sidewalks and street trees, but lighting, street furniture, other things that provide that character. Counties are not set up to administer that in the long run. That's a city function. And so separate from today's discussion, Spokane County is working with other counties through our state county association to create some options for how urban growth areas and annexations are brought back together to bring some of these into their adjacent cities at some date certain where the cities are better able to provide for these services. And the economics are really complicated right now, which is why it doesn't happen. So it's a big challenge, not just for us, but for every county that has urban growth areas. So talking about the streets, the different sections in front of different kinds of uses. The picture on the lower left, a relatively narrow street, but it has parking bays cut out on the sides, not unlike Summit Parkway next door to Kendall Yard. So you maintain a street presence for a through presence and emergency vehicle presence, but you provide for that parking in these protected bays on the side. With that, we would welcome thoughts and questions from you. Mr. Chairman, if again, to indulge, if you would, members of the public that might have something to offer and might want more than 3 minutes.
We're going to open it up. We're going to open it up. Who would like to start? Jed, do you want to go next? Mr. Frank? Welcome.
Thank you. Jim Frank. For a lot of years, I worked with Greenstone Corporation, and we're a large home builder in Spokane since mid-1980s. Um, I'm retired now from Greenstone, doing a lot of work with, I'll call it a housing advocate, working with a lot of nonprofit home builders and a lot of small home builders. And what's formed my thoughts on home building and real estate development is really how I grew up. And I grew up in the neighborhood that Scott talked about. I grew up in Garfield neighborhood. I went to Garfield Elementary School, went to junior high at Havermale, so I'm very familiar with the Garfield, Emerson Garfield, West Central neighborhoods. I grew up in those neighborhoods. And in the 1950s, when I grew up in those neighborhoods, they were walkable mixed-use neighborhoods. They were the kind of neighborhoods that we're trying to develop now. Those neighborhoods were developed before there were planning regulations and planning departments. And those neighborhoods were marked by a variety of housing types. There were single-family homes, there were small houses on small lots, there were small multi-family buildings, there were small businesses, there were a variety of services within the neighborhood. So they were all walkable because services were within walking distance of where you lived. And it created a wonderful neighborhood. I knew the name of people within 6 blocks of where I lived in every direction. They knew who I was. If I pinched some penny candy from the little corner grocery store, my mother knew about it before I got home. And so, not that ever happened, but it's a kind of neighborhoods, these walkable mixed-use neighborhoods are what people really want. It's driven our business for 45 years. And I've worked with neighborhoods. I've worked with a lot of neighborhoods over those years because we've had to interact with them. And people are concerned whenever you do a development, regardless of what it is, people are concerned because you're creating some level of uncertainty on the assets that they hold most important. And their home, the quality of life in their neighborhood, the place where they're raising their family is very important to every single human being. And so they're afraid of change. And so you have to talk with them and you have to understand what their concerns are and you have to try to deal with them. But in that context, I've learned what people want for a neighborhood. And I believe I have a good understanding of what a good neighborhood is and how you create it. And I think trying to go to these neighborhood zones, the neighborhood 1 and neighborhood 2 zones is a good idea. And I think that when you read the text about what you're trying to accomplish, it's intended to provide low to medium density housing and replace the low density residential zone. The neighborhood 2 residential zone is the new mixed use zone intended to create walkable mixed use neighborhoods. Those words are good. Those words are the vision of what you want to try to accomplish. But the devil's in the details. The devil is the details of how do you actually do that? How do you actually build those neighborhoods? And what kind of development code regulations do you have that are not just going to permit them, but are going to encourage that kind of development to happen? When you look at the details of these zones, they don't do that. They're not dealing with the real issues, the real changes that need to take place in order for these neighborhoods to happen. Because there's not a lot of land available in the urban growth boundary that you're going to see a lot of big brand new 100-unit projects on 20, 30, 40 acres because there is no 20, 30, or 40 acres available. Most of our development over the next 20 years is going to be infill development. So we have to understand how do we build a mixed-use neighborhood out of a neighborhood that didn't start off that way. And so you have to make, this is hard Because we have a code that's based on this Euclidean zoning where we decided that we have to separate all these uses out. And yet we have to go back to a model where we're trying to bring them back together in some way. And how do you bring them back together in a way that can be as compatible as possible? And this can be done. And we're doing it in a lot of different places. And I think that you've created 4 zones. And I don't know that you need 4 zones. You probably get by with maybe 3, maybe 2, because this isn't. I'd start off by saying that the neighborhood zone 1 is too low density to work as a walkable mixed-use neighborhood. There, you have to be able to allow up to 6 units in a building. That's the definition of middle housing by the Department of Commerce. That's the definition of middle housing in the statutes that have been passed by the state. When you allow that housing, you can't put it on a 13,000 square foot lot. It's not going to ever happen. It costs you $100,000 today to buy a 5,000 square foot lot. Nobody's going to buy a $250,000 lot and put a fourplex on. Not going to economically happen. That you need to get rid of lot size. You need to get rid of this idea that we need to regulate uses by all these dimensional standards. What the old codes did, what they did in the case of Emerson Garfield neighborhood that I grew up in, they didn't regulate by use. They regulated by the mass and scale of the buildings, not by use. And so you have to go back to a code that regulates the mass and scale of the buildings, not the use. So that's what's happening, for example, in Kendall Yards. We got rid of the dimensional standards. And so we had to do that through a PUD process. But you can see there that the mass and the scale of the buildings is similar. That's what we're doing in the River District project in Liberty Lake. That we were able to get a code in Liberty Lake that regulated mass and scale of buildings, not use. So that if we're building a residential neighborhood, we can have retail centers, we can have a little retail use in that neighborhood, but those uses are permitted with with what I'll call a limited, they're limited uses. In other words, there's some standards you have to meet to locate retail in the neighborhood. But a wide variety of residential is permitted. So you can have single family houses, you can have cottages, you can have townhouses, you can have row houses, you can have multifamily buildings, but they're all limited to basically 2 stories. So that's what has to happen in this NR2 zone or the NR1 zone, is the intensity is lower than your NR2 zone, but it's lower because the mass and scale of the buildings is kept smaller. So right now you're not allowing multifamily uses in that NR1 zone. But you need to allow multifamily uses, but they just need to be smaller. So you limit them to 2 stories. The changes in the condominium code in the state of Washington are allowing condominiums to be developed on small buildings. So as long as your building is 2 stories and under 12 units, you can build a condominium. So if you allow a 6-unit building in that zone and you limit the height to 2 stories, then you can build a condominium. And so that is important, that you have a range of housing options for people, that it's not all regulated by the type of housing, it's regulated by the mass and scale of the building. When you get to your NR2 zone, then the intensity goes up. The uses stay the same. You're simply allowing buildings that are slightly larger. So then you allow 3-story buildings. You allow buildings that have more units in them. And so that's what, like Kendall Yards is probably what you're going to call your neighborhood residential 2. The project that we're doing at Liberty Lake is your neighborhood residential 1. It's the intensity of development is regulated by the mass and the scale of the building that you're permitting there. And I really feel that I'm not sure there's a need for what you're calling the neighborhood commercial, because the neighborhood commercial is really your neighborhood residential too. You're allowing higher density commercial development, you're allowing higher density residential development, and I don't know that you need all these different zone classifications because I'm not sure how they're different. And so I probably wouldn't have 4 of them. I'd probably try to cut them down. Not that that's the end of the world if you end up with 4, but you have to realize that the difference between these zones is going to be the intensity of development and the kind and mass and scale of the buildings that you're going to permit. From the housing side, there's been a narrative that's developed in the planning community, and it's reflected in this code over the last 10 or 15 years, that the only way we can provide housing for middle and low income families is to build apartments. That's been the narrative, that all of the development codes and regulations have gone in that direction. And so it's right now in any jurisdiction, it's easy to build apartments. That's why you're seeing so many of them. If you want to build an apartment, just go get a building permit. That's the end of it. You don't have to do anything else. But if you want to build small houses, they're not permitted as a matter of right in any code. So you have to go through some long, complicated PUD process or unit lot subdivision process. In Airway Heights, we're doing a project with Habitat, doing some houses on 3,000 square foot lots and some small multifamily buildings. There were 2-story small multifamily buildings. In order to do that, we had to get a comprehensive plan change, we had to get a zone change, we had to get a PUD, and then we had to replat the property. It took 3 years to go through that process. No small builder, no infill developer is going to go through that process. It's way too complicated, way too costly, way too expensive. They don't have access to capital that allows them to go through that complicated process. But this is true not just in Airway Heights, it's true everywhere. Airway Heights has a minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet. This is their new middle housing code, has a minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet. You're proposing a minimum lot size of 4,000 square feet. The houses that we're building for Habitat, the houses that you see on these, and I sent you just some drawings to show you what does small houses on small lots look like? You know, what do they look like? What do the floor plans look like? These are houses that can be built on lots. The smaller townhouses can be built on lots that are as small as 1,000 square feet. We can build 1,000 or 1,200 square foot 2-bedroom house on a lot that's 1,500 square feet. We can build a single family rancher house on a lot that's 1,200 square foot single family rancher on 3,000 square feet. And in order to do that, it's not permitted in the code because we don't meet all of these dimensional standards that you've laid out here. We have to go through a complicated process to build those houses. And that has to end. People don't want to live in apartments when you have to be concerned about the quality of the neighborhood and the quality of life that people are experiencing, and not just the volume of houses that you can build. And as soon as an apartment gets over 50 to 100 units, you don't live in a neighborhood anymore. You're living in a project. If you want to integrate into a neighborhood, these units need to be smaller. They need to be small enough to integrate into a neighborhood where you're part of the neighborhood. You're not living in a project. And especially when you're talking about low-income housing, you don't get stigmatized by it. This is a question of housing equity, housing quality, as much as it is housing volume. And yet, the narrative that's been developed in the planning community is that we're going to make it easy to build apartments. And you can see that in this document because there are no like you look at the cottage ordinance and look at there's a page or two of development regulations about doing a little cottage cluster development, open space requirements and how much has to be on two sides of the house and how big it has to be. And you go build a 200-unit apartment project and you don't have to have any open space, zero, none. And if you want to see that, go out and look at the new project that's built on Appleway near the City of Spokane Valley, City Hall. 300 units. It's a slum before it's even opened. And people don't have to live that way. You can accomplish densities of 15 to 20 units an acre by doing this middle housing, what I call small houses on small lots. You can achieve density with that. You don't have to build these big apartments. I'm not saying apartments aren't you don't need them someplace. I'm not saying they're bad, but they're not the only answer. And right now they've become the only answer. You can't build houses. You can't build small houses. So I've outlined in what I gave you a set of standards that I think need to apply if you're going to have middle housing built in any zone. A set of standards that I think need to be accommodated. You can't have a minimum lot size. You can't have a requirement that houses have frontage on a public street because you need to allow them to be clustered around a driveway or around an open space. You can't mandate a minimum lot width because I'm showing you some lots there, some houses that are 15 feet wide. And these are beautiful little cottage houses. They're 15 feet wide. They'll fit on a 25-foot wide lot. We're building townhouses that are 15 feet wide. You can't mandate building site coverages that are less than 65%. Because when you're doing small houses on small lots, when you're doing townhouses, when you're doing row houses, you're going to occupy most of the lot. The only open space that you really get with a townhouse is the front yard. We built a lot of townhouses. There's a lot of people that don't want big yards with their houses. There's a lot of single females that feel much safer in a townhouse than they do on a house on a 5,000 square foot lot because they've got neighbors, they've got eyes on themselves. There's a lot of young people who simply want a house and don't want a yard to take care of. So people have the freedom to choose the kind of house that they want. And people love living in these townhouses in all the neighborhoods, whether it's Liberty Lake or North Spokane at the Meadworks project or in Kendall Yards. We built a lot of townhouses and people love living in townhouses and the opportunity to live in their front yard, essentially, the social connections it builds with people in their neighborhood and people that are walking by. You can't set these side yard and front yard and backyard dimensions so large that they simply make the ability to build the house impossible. Like this code, if you want to build a triplex, they're saying you have to be on a 13,000 square foot lot. This is like nonsense. Honestly, it's nonsense. So, and so I've tried to outline things there, and I do hope that part of what the Plan Commission can do is send some direction back to your consultant that's drafting this, saying, hey, this is what we're looking for, and we can't have a code that makes it impossible to build single family houses, small homes on small lots. We can't make it difficult to build townhouses. We need to encourage that kind of use, not just permit it. And that means it needs to be permitted outright. I need to be able to go do a subdivision and plot those lots out. Now, we can do that right now in your mixed use zone. The county has a mixed use zone. And the entire Meadworks project is using that mixed use zone. That zone's going to go away. And it's going to be replaced with these other zones. And we don't have a minimum lot size in that project now. So if we want to do townhouses, we just plot out townhouses. Doesn't matter what size the lots are. But you won't be able to do that under this new code. And so you have to encourage middle housing, and at the same time, you have to permit under limited standards, services to enter back into neighborhoods. We had a big community meeting for a project we're doing in Grandview. And it's in the city, and they're concerned about traffic issues. And after talking about the traffic issues for 15 minutes, then someone raised their hand and said, is there going to be a coffee shop here? Is there a place that we can have some services in our neighborhood? And this is coming from a group of people that basically were hoping that we're going to go away, that we're not going to actually build in their neighborhood. But they want services in their neighborhood. They want someplace to be able to walk. They want to be able to build social fabric within their neighborhoods. They want places where the people in their neighborhood can gather and get to know their neighbors and the rest of it. And that only happens when you provide places for that to happen. And that means you have to have some services that are available within those neighborhoods. And Liberty Lakes has got some basic, simple standards that limit the size of those retail areas, limit the location of them, and so forth. They have to be in the lower density mixed use zone here, they have to be 1 story. Unless they have residential, they can be 2 or 3 stories if they have residential, but otherwise they have to be 1 story. And they're limited in size in some way. And then you allow the market to choose where those are going to be located. You allow the market to try to go back into some of these neighborhoods that we have in the Spokane area that are in unincorporated Spokane County. How do we build some services back into those existing neighborhoods? And when you have shopping centers and those kinds of things, then you have to look at how do we get residential back into areas that are exclusively commercial? We have to get residential back into those neighborhoods because businesses just can't thrive in a isolated monoculture kind of environment. And in Liberty Lake, we took the Meadowood Technology Park, which is basically an office park. It was zoned light industrial, and we rezoned it to mixed use because we wanted that not to be an office park. We wanted that to be a mixed use center that would have retail, that would have office space, but also would have a lot of residential. It's been a fantastic success over the last 5 years. We've got a private school in there. The private school is providing some recreational facilities. We've added a lot of retail uses. We've added 200 units of multifamily. So all of this can happen. This kind of redevelopment can happen, but you have to create a framework within which it's possible. And you can't make it complicated. You can't have very difficult regulatory framework for it to happen within. So anyway, I hope this is really important because we're going to have to live with these standards for probably 20 years. And so I hope we put a lot of thought into them. And I hope that we can do it in a way that allows mixed use neighborhoods, small houses on small lots to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. Questions?
Is it appropriate for me to applaud? She doesn't pay.
You just don't go away. We might have some questions for you. Did you want to field some questions?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I have a question. So, you really put together a vision. Thank you. So everybody's familiar with beautiful projects that you put together. These townhomes, these are simple. Conforming mortgages will be able to be had. So I'm just kind of looking at the metrics of this thing, make sure it all hangs together. My daughter lives in Alexandria, Virginia, and the only reason why they're narrow is because in the old days they taxed on the width of the house. That was kind of the idea.
Right.
And I guess my underlying question is, how expensive are these townhomes that you build? I mean, the apartments are one thing, condominiums, but these fee simple homes that you buy, they might fill the housing need, but we have to worry about affordability.
We're building them. This is I did have another document I was gonna submit it. I'm gonna submit this to you as part of the record. It's a document that we put together on the cost of housing, the cost of building small houses on small lots, the cost of building townhouses compared to the cost of building apartments. And we're building houses, these small houses in Airway Heights for Habitat. And we built 100 units there now for them over the last 3 years. And we can deliver a house, a 1,200 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath house for $200,000. That apartment project that I was talking about in the Spokane Valley near the Spokane Valley City Hall, those units cost over $300,000 a unit for basically an 800 square foot unit. So what happens is that when you're building 4 units or less, you're building under the International Residential Code. The International Residential Code allows a house to be designed, for example, by a house designer. It doesn't have to be designed by an architect. It doesn't have to be sprinkled. And it doesn't have the same energy code requirements or the same earthquake requirements. As the mass and scale of the building gets larger, the cost of construction go up. So as soon as you get to 4 units, now I have to sprinkle the unit. It costs $10,000 or $15,000 just to sprinkle it. But then the unit has to be designed by an architect. It costs $15,000 to have a townhouse designed by an architect. You have higher energy code standards. You have higher fire code standards on wall thicknesses and wall separations and all of this. And then as they get a little bit bigger and you go onto a podium, then you have to put in elevators, and then you have to put in underground parking, and all of this adds to the cost of construction. The most affordable construction are the middle housing. This middle housing is the most affordable housing you can produce. And if you're trying to subsidize it, we'll have the lowest subsidy. Some of the houses we're building for Habitat, we're building them for families that are making 80% of median income, and there's virtually no subsidy. These apartments that they're building have 100% subsidy on a cost of $400,000 because the nonprofit that owns them cannot afford to have a mortgage. They cannot afford to have a mortgage when they're renting to these low-income families. So the subsidy requirements are huge. So, but this is, there's just a misunderstanding about all of this. This is far more affordable than building apartments, and the quality of housing you're providing is order of magnitudes different, because all this small housing integrates finely into a neighborhood. People don't know that you have a low-income house. You're just another house in a neighborhood. But if you're in a low-income housing apartment project, you're immediately stigmatized. And that needs to end, because you're not going to break the chain of poverty by building that kind of housing.
Fair enough.
I would like to see a copy, because there's a lot of information what Jim just talked about that's reflected in what you were just saying. If it's possible.
We will send that out to you.
Yeah.
We will send that out to you tomorrow.
That would be great.
And I've got a question for Scott. What do you talk about, the phrase form-based housing that you shared with us a couple of years ago? Is that what he's?
Almost exactly, yes. And that's the idea of uses and sizes and intensities are the benchmarks instead of, separation of a use. No, it's very much similar to that. Form-based codes can be very detailed. And that's not really useful for our unincorporated UGAs. I think it's a particularly useful tool for downtowns. And the city of Spokane tried that a few years ago in the Logan neighborhood around Gonzaga on Hamilton Street using a form-based code. It doesn't work as well in our urban growth areas, which is why we're trying to adapt it into this neighborhood zone. I think what Jim talked about is a common philosophy, but pointed out that the zoning tools that are most used by communities are outdated for the most part and may not be able to be tweaked, we may need to start at a much more basic level. And we're very much open to that. And to add to that, one of the challenges that the GMA has for us that is new is housing, planning for housing. And we've talked about this with you before. We can't simply plan for affordable housing and leave it at that in nondescript term. We have to plan for housing that meets income bands based on area median income, 0 to 30, 30 to 50% median income, 50 to 80, and so on. What Jim has outlined is a strategy that suggests that everything that is being planned at 80% area median income and under is presumed to be multifamily construction. Jim's outlined a process that said, well, no, maybe that zero, maybe it's 50 to 80 and 80 to 100 could still buy something if you provide the opportunity for the market to build it. And I think that's a very intriguing approach to doing this. It gives us a chance to look at something more innovative than simply the housing in multifamily. And the argument is good for environmental justice, which is another term that is fairly new to Spokane County planning, but has been around now for a little while. Yeah, putting someone in a 300 unit housing project now, in some ways, is not that different than the Robert Taylor homes in Chicago in 1972. 40-story high rise, and it's nothing but publicly owned and publicly subsidized housing. Pruitt-Igoe in St. Louis. They were ultimately horrible places to live, and they were dynamited out of there 20 years later. Not quite so bad here, but it's that same idea. You're in a project where you never have any possibility of taking pride of ownership of your community, let alone your house. So Commissioner French has introduced a countywide planning policy to set a home ownership target of whatever your 10-year rate of home ownership is, that's your new target. You can't slip below that. That'll be considered by our steering committee here later in June. And so we're moving in a direction of trying to provide that level of ownership in a different kind of product. So
You, Dave?
Yeah, that's
You know what? You know. All right.
no, please go ahead.
Anything else? I want to do good here.
Thank you very much. My name is Daniel Leroy. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for Habitat for Humanity Spokane. So we're excited to come and offer some comment and some feedback for this code. The mission of Habitat for Humanity Spokane is to develop permanently affordable home ownership opportunities for families at or below 80% of the area's median income, as Jim was discussing. For the majority of working families, Habitat's product is one of the only pathways for affordable home ownership in our community currently. To accomplish this mission of delivering safe, decent, and affordable homeownership opportunities to our community in a time when land and building costs are growing faster than most families can keep up with, it is crucial to develop codes that allow developers the freedom and flexibility to build quality ownership ready middle housing products that have for far too long been made impossible due to restrictive design standards. Making middle housing on subdivided lots easy to build by right through simple processes will go a long way to address our housing crisis. With the right regulatory environment, we can build small houses on small lots and other middle housing typologies for the fraction of the cost that then multifamily development requires. With the correct standards, we can achieve similar densities to traditional multifamily projects while delivering units that have a higher standard of life. This is exactly what Jim was just discussing. Habitat, Jim, and a number of other affordable housing developers have walked with multiple jurisdictions to the implementation of HB 1110. That's the middle housing bill that is requiring these changes. And so we've seen some of the stumbling blocks and some of the different code changes work well and work poorly. And we'd love to offer our feedback on what we think has worked in this process and what we think the proposed draft could use improvements on. Specifically, I would like to reiterate a lot of the things that Jim mentioned, but the elimination of minimum lot sizes in the NR1 and NR2 zones is really key. We really need the flexibility to design our site plans, specifically in infill projects. We need flexibility to make sure we're maximizing quality of life, efficient use of space, and when we have minimum lot sizes, that really negatively affects our ability to organize site plans the way that work best for the project. Additionally, allowing a higher variety of middle housing typologies than is currently allowed in the NR1 specifically, but also NR2. This needs to include sort of no restrictions on lot size for the fourplexes and including sixplexes. We've got a number of amazing condo designs that are 2 stories that work really, really well and can fit into a lower intensity, as Jen was mentioning, and these can be really effective in providing quality middle housing options. Eliminating mandatory frontage requirements on public streets. These, if you think of the cottage developments that are clustered around a green space, those are not fronted onto public streets. They have access to either a private drive or an easement. Those are really key again for the flexibility of site planning. That's really when you're doing infill, that is one of the hardest things, is having flexible site planning. And most impactful for ownership products, making sure that the subdivision process is by right and easy. When we get into redesigning some of these codes under HB 1110, the subdivision process can really rely too heavily on PUDs or the unit lot subdivision processes, which for ownership products adds a lot of cost. When you're doing affordable home ownership products, having additional 6-month period to go through a PUD process, the holding costs and the interest for the land, the ups and downs of public hearing processes. These are the things that affordable homeownership providers have to go through that affordable rental or market rate rental providers do not have to go through. And so steering clear, avoiding the mistakes of other jurisdictions have made while implementing this process, and just making sure that subdividing in a basic short plat by right way and avoiding unit lot subdivision and PUD processes can really save a lot of cost for the developer and help the market and affordable home builders provide units and bring those units to market. As we're looking at the future of the county, the unincorporated county inside the UGA is one of probably our biggest impact zones, and getting this specific code right at this specific time probably has a much higher likelihood of impacting our community than many of the codes we've worked on. So it's important to take notes from the other communities that have gone before and try to make improvements on what we've tried already. So thank you very much for your time. And
Stay right there. I have another question.
Yeah.
This may be a Mr. Frank question. So in order to preserve the integrity of the units, the homes, will there be CCRs? And would there be HOA fees to maintain central, services? It's kind of a cost thing. It's kind of just curious.
If you're allowing the lots as a matter of right, and you're just doing a normal subdivision, then there aren't necessarily any homeowner fees. But if you're only going to permit the lots by going through a PUD process or going through a unit lot subdivision, which is basically a mini PUD process, then yes, you have to form homeowners associations. And then you have homeowner association fees imposed on families that don't really want them. And I can't tell you how many homeowners associations have gone off the rails. It's not a good thing, and you don't really want to have a homeowners association unless it's absolutely necessary.
Thank you. Sorry. So be quiet.
any other questions?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
You can come down. You have a question as well?
Yeah, it's just a comment.
Okay. Well, okay, Julie.
Julia McHugh, West Plains. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Frank, for introducing a flexibility in housing regulations that it sounds like maybe could be a new leaf turning over. But this is a perfect segue for me to repeat my very common refrain in front of this board, and that is that it is per it is possible to repurpose office and commercial space into mixed use, into housing, into all kinds of things. And as we've talked a number of times in this process, there are hundreds and thousands of vacant square feet of office space and commercial space all over this county. Small commercial, small little vest pocket, strip mall-y stuff, many vacant areas which could be that these concepts and directions for providing housing could be put to use. And I want to encourage you one more time to really seriously take a hard and honest look at the reuse for office and commercial space for housing. Very important here. It's all the infrastructure you'd ever want. Roads, curbs, gutters, sidewalks, water, septic, or excuse me, sewer, electricity, Wi-Fi. All of that stuff is there, leading to many of these vacant properties. And if Mr. Frank's numbers pan out, then it can work out for the developer as well, whether it's a large project or a small project. So I think it's time to open the doors and reconsider all of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to make? Very good. Thank you.
Cameron Napora. I'm a local builder. Jim, never met you, but I've seen your work. Appreciate it. He's doing a lot of cool things, and I'm a very small scale that did a project on South Hill, townhome 16 feet wide. I said, oh, maybe I should do an ADU on this. So I've got a townhouse with an ADU out back. The problem is nobody's buying it because it costs more money. So let's say it's 500,000 and it's in a kind of a turning neighborhood, and I've got an ADU. So, well, you could rent it out, or there's multiple ideas. Well, but you've got to have someone that can afford that. So then we go to the affordability. The $200,000 price point is a wonderful price point, but that's kind of, it seems like it's scooting along, and now 300 to 325 is the affordability part. I have a piece of LV, is it LVR? Low density residential. I have a 7-acre piece that I've been sitting on for about 8 years, 9 years, and I want to develop it exactly like we've described. And I would echo Mr. Frank that this new level of housing is not really getting me that excited. It's like, oh, there's still these challenges. We still don't know if I can do it, you know. But if we take the lot restrictions on this out, then it maybe fills it. So it's tough because you get someone at his level, someone at my level, and there's many different people doing this in town, right? In the community, we're building a community. We're trying to be thoughtful of folks that are concerned about environment, folks that are concerned about safety. We add maybe some commercial ideas like, okay, there's going to be a convenience store. That's okay. But if they sell alcohol, now it starts to, oh, is this going to be just this convenience store right next door, or is this a coffee shop? Well, the problem is the coffee shop doesn't make money. So to bring in the coffee shop, you got to have a real windfall. It's a beautiful concept, and I had a coffee shop. I loved that, but I had a hard time making money at it. So to have this commercial infill, I love that idea too. But how are we going to make it work? How is it going to be affordable? How is it going to thrive? Is it going to be the best pizza in town? I don't know. So I do appreciate his comments on these zones. It feels like we might have too many zones. It might not be quite hitting spot, but I do appreciate all the hard work that's gone into this, and I'm thankful. So thank you for holding his.
Paul.
Paul?
Yeah.
Can you hear us, Paul? Paul?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Paul Crop here.
Hey, Paul.
My residence is on Moran Prairie in the unincorporated UGA. That's the third time I've heard Jim Frank give his presentation, that was the best one. That was the one where he provided you with a really good bunch of supporting material. And for the four of you here tonight, I really, really, really wish you would take it to heart and look at your planning director and say, you know, let's see about that, because he's probably right. Who do you want? What is the kind of openness that the community of Spokane wants to be? It wants to be as open as possible to all sorts of folks. And this is the way to do it. So I'll just leave it with that, and thank Jim Frank for his knowledge and his concern and his focus. I want to switch to a question to Scott Chesney. You ended your presentation with transportation and street standards for. Now I kind of understand why TAC for transportation wasn't in the cards early on. But I'd like to know if you plan to do that. And I think that actually, if the goal is to have county compatible, but more, as it were, neighborly standards are possible, I think you can find people who'll be willing to support that if you want to do a TAC.
Paul, I appreciate that. We hadn't considered that, but that's a good idea, particularly since we're working with Public Works, who independently was initiating an update of the county road standards. So now is very much the time to do that.
Maybe.
It also fits very well into the idea of UGAs and future annexation strategies. Because one of the holdbacks is if a city has no interest in annexation, then the county historically does not want to plan to city standards because the county budgets are not set up to maintain them long term. But if there was a date certain at which that UGA or that development would be annexed into the city, then the county is much more amenable to be planning at those municipal standards because they're not going to be on the county's books for 40 years. So it's a good time to hold that conversation.
All right, thank you. I have no other comment.
Stephen?
Yes. Yes.
After being on the planning commission for some years, and my comment I'm going to share with you is nothing new because I've had a real problem with it. And Jim, you and I could share some stories going back 30 years. But unified planning standards within the city, within Spokane County, I'm really bothered because I go to different jurisdictions and it's like, okay, so what do you allow, like PUDs? You don't allow that. I mean, it is like a whole new world. And this is one of the things that you didn't bring up, Jim, but I really see unified planning really needs to start taking place in a lot of these areas for Spokane. Because again, when you get to that city limits, boy, we just drew the line. And it's a hard one. And I say that we got to look at that unified, better planning standards. I don't know what your thoughts are, but that's just mine.
We Spokane County, through our county associations, WASAC, are in the context of this urban growth area discussion and annexations, is really looking at how does that joint planning make sense. But it really only makes sense if you agree ultimately that urban development needs to be in and administered by cities. That's not really a county function. We can facilitate it, we can get planned for it, we can do that, but ultimately it's a city function. Municipal finance is the biggest problem to making that work right now. All of that said, we have at least a handshake agreement among City of Spokane, Airway Heights, Cheney, Medical Lake to take a look next year when we get our comprehensive plans done, to look at the West Plains in a GMA sub-area plan context where everybody can talk about how their standards affect different parts of that development, how development might be better placed in Airway Heights, which could then protect some ecological function in the unincorporated area. Rather than mitigate wetlands, can we protect the wetlands but move the development to Medical Lake or move the development to somewhere else? That sort of interjurisdictional planning makes a lot of sense on the West Plains where it's very complicated. And so we're, like I said, a handshake. We've all agreed that it's something we'd like to do. And so I see a light at the end of that tunnel.
Thank you.
Heavy thunderstorms at 6 p.m. says right here on my phone. Spokane, but anyway.
So this might be our emergency shelter for the night then. We've got some water
Do we have,
over there.
do we have any money? No, okay. Any other comments? Mr. Albee, did you want to take the podium one more time?
Please. I'll be brief.
You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. I will be brief because I think we've been here for a long time. I've learned a lot from all that's going on. Good evening to all of you. My name is James Albee. And I'm a property owner adjacent to the Moran View Estates area. I'm here today to express my support for the inclusion of Moran View Estates within the urban growth area. From a practical standpoint, this area represents one of the most logical and efficient locations for expansion in southeast Spokane. It is directly adjacent to existing development patterns, and it can be served in a way that aligns with planned infrastructure rather than extending outward in a scattered or inefficient manner. In my view, this is exactly the kind of step that reflects the intent of the Growth Management Act. Directing growth to areas where it makes the most sense, where it can be supported, and where it maintains a clear and contained edge development. Approving this inclusion would support coordinated planning, efficient use of infrastructure, and a logical boundary for growth in this part of the county. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anybody else online?
No.
Anybody else would like to express an opinion or contribute to the discussion? Logan, anything to add?
Yeah, appreciate all the presenters, and thanks for all the thoughts and perspective. I generally support different ways of thinking about zoning, especially ways that think more about massing and scale. I do have some difficulty with Mr. Frank's comments that, everybody should have options to choose where to be housed, but then he describes a brand new housing unit as a slum. I find that to be rather problematic. And if we're trying to talk about freedom of housing choices, maybe we shouldn't disparage one person's choice and not another's. But otherwise, I appreciate all the comments and feedback. And like I said, I more or less support a plan that is less bound on lot sizes and uses and more bound by massing and scale and design. That's all I got.
Thank you, Logan. Revision to the weather is 9 p.m. So we're good. All right. So the next order of business will be unless you have anything else to add.
Nope, we are done for today.
Let's talk about the approval of the minutes of April the 9th and April 30th. First up, April 30th, the minutes have been distributed. Does anybody on the commission have any comments, corrections? If not, the chair will entertain a motion to adopt those minutes.
Move to adopt.
Second. All those in favor of adopting those minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Those minutes are hereby adopted. Thank you. Next order of business is the adoption of the minutes of April 30th. By the way, thanks, Ron, for putting these in front of us. Appreciate it. Here again, the same question. Are there any changes, any inaccuracies, anything that we need to the change? If not, the chair will obtain a motion to adopt the minutes.
So
So moved, so.
Second.
Second. All those in favor of adopting those minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Logan?
I'll abstain from this one. I think I was absent, so.
That's true. Thank you for the clarification. Okay, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. We said that. Those minutes are hereby adopted.
Majority then.
You have a quorum, and the majority,
He just had to abstain.
Oh, that's.
you need, if he's abstaining, you need two of the three of you to act on something.
So those are adopted. Thank you very much. Closing remarks by the staff.
Mr. Chairman, thank you all for your patience. Thanks to the members of the public who have made comments before and during the meeting. We listened very carefully to those, and we will take direction from you as perhaps suggested by Mr. Kropp. And we will start to look at how this can be worked into something to come back at our next few meetings. Things are going to get more intense as we move along and all these pieces start coming together. So we will be before you again in a few weeks. A couple of sidebar parts of that. We are briefing the Board of County Commissioners on Monday. And that's particularly on the housing issues and the allocations by income band will be one of those issues. And then that will be in front of the steering committee of elected officials June 17th for a recommendation back to the board for action. That'll be a public hearing. And the steering committee is also considering countywide planning policies regarding home ownership percentage, and one that will allow us to review and monitor how our growth forecasts are matching growth reality. So permits versus forecast on an annual basis, and that'll give the county as a whole a chance to reshuffle those housing allocations on a shorter term basis if they're not being met by individual communities. So it's there's a lot before the steering committee, the board, and we will see you in a month or so.
Just to note, we may want to take these advanced agendas home and keep those handy.
We will distribute an updated version of that when necessary, but as of today, that's the current plan for the rest of the year.
All right, thank you. Anything the commissioners want to bring up?
And by the way, that advanced agenda is posted on our web for others to see what's up, what we believe is upcoming, with the caveat that things do change.
All right, thank you. Logan, do you have any further comments?
Nothing from me. Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn by Logan. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. You're hereby adjourned. Thank you very much.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, Logan.
Thank you, Logan.
Yes.
That's fair.